Thank you for joining Wars of the Rosies as we continue with part 33, The Crescent, of the Origin of Freemasonry and Knights Templar, by John R. Bennett. The Crescent. Mohammedanism was conceived in Abraham and given birth through Mohammed. Abraham had only one son, Isaac, by his wife Sarah, who was born in the year 1896 BC. 4 years after Isaac's birth, Ishmael, who was the son of Abraham by Sarah's Egyptian handmaid, Hagar, as is related in Genesis chapter 21, was driven into the wilderness with his mother. And he will be a wild man. His hand will be against every man, and every man's hand against him. And he shall dwell in the presence of all his brethren. Genesis chapter 26. Ishmael was blessed, and had 12 sons that became princes according to their nations, and they dwelt from Havilah to Shur, that is before Egypt, as thou goest towards Assyria. Genesis 25. They had golden earrings because they were Ishmaelites. Judges chapter 8:24. Ishmael died in the year 1773 BC in the presence of all his brethren, at the age of 137 years. The Arabs regard him as their immediate ancestor. The legend of the people is as follows. When our first parents were driven out of paradise, they wandered until they finally settled on the border of the great Arabian desert. Here they built a temple, the Kaaba, an exact imitation of that in which they worshipped in the Garden of Eden. 10 generations later, a flood swept that region and destroyed the frail building, so that no vestige remained. 10 generations later, in a fit of cruel jealousy, Sarah, the wife of the patriarch Abraham, caused him to drive out his handmaid Hagar and their son Ishmael. And while wandering in the desert, an angel revealed this sight to Hagar, and she gave her thirsty son to drink of the refreshing waters of its well, Zimzim. It was here, on account of its goodly supply of water, the chief attraction in locating an oriental city, that a tribe of Amalekites came and founded the city of Mecca. They aided Ishmael in rebuilding the Kaaba, and to their assistance came the angel Gabriel with a white stone from paradise, which even today is to be found in the wall of the Kaaba, turned black by the devout kisses of sinful lips. In the 6th century of the present era, the keeper of this sacred stone was Abdullah, a very poor but noble man of the tribe of Quraysh, one of the most distinguished Arabian tribes. The guardianship of the Kaaba was hereditarily entrusted to it, but his family, Hashim, was poor. Abdullah died just before his first son was born. That son was called Mohammed, the Praised, and was born in Mecca in the year 570. In later years, when comparative deification of the prophet took place, there were added to the circumstances of his birth legends similar to those of the other founders of great religions. It is said that as soon as he was born, he turned his eyes to the light and distinctly said, "Great is God, and I am his prophet." The river Tigris overflowed its banks. The palace of King Khosrow toppled to the ground. The fires of Zoroaster that had burned for centuries were extinguished by the brighter light, and mules talked and sheep bowed to him when he went out. He lost his mother, Amina, when he was 6 years old, and was adopted a few years later by his uncle, Abu Talib, with whom he went to Syria. There he met an Arab monk, who informed his uncle of the future awaiting his nephew, and charged him to guard the boy with the greatest care. From that time till his 20th year, he is scarcely heard of. The Prophet Mohammed. In that year, he served in the ward of Benskini Nahani tribe. In his 25th year, he was a shepherd on the pasture fields in the vicinity of Mecca. About this time, he entered the employment of a wealthy widow who was some 15 years his senior. This widow, Khadijah, employed him to look after her caverns, and his management of her affairs was attended with uniform success. On his return from a journey to Damascus, where he had met with greater success than ever, the exalted widow offered to marry him and pleaded her cause with such fervor and eloquence that the young man consented. In many respects, this marriage was most important in its results. It at once placed Mohammed in a position of affluence and raised his rank equal to that of the influential tribes of the Quraysh. Mohammed now gave up business and devoted himself to religious meditations. The religion of the Arabs at this time, 595, was Sabianism, a kind of idolatry or system of sun, moon, and star worship, widely prevalent not only in Arabia, but in Chaldea, Syria, and Ethiopia. Idolatry had overclouded the old monotheistic one God of the Arabs and brought the religious instincts of the people into manifold confusion. Mohammed was surrounded by Jews, Christians, and Jewish Christians, and in his journeys with the caverns had frequent opportunities of discussing religious questions with them. It is certain that he was far from satisfied with Judaism, Christianity, or Sabianism, the popular religions of the Arabs. The sense of misery and immorality and the utter spiritual degradation of the entire people made a vivid impression on his sensitive mind and suggested that remedies should be found. In his 40th year, he received the first revelation concerning the new truth. He hastened to his beloved wife and, confiding to her what had happened, fell into a severe paroxysm of epilepsy. He became subject to the most fearful mental torments. Hesitation and fear possessed him. In the end, he overcame them, with the result that he felt himself called upon to overthrow the worship of his countrymen, establish the belief in the unity of God, and that he was the one divinely appointed to preach it to the world. The evidence of trustworthy historians goes to show that he was known for his kindness and gentleness, his honesty and truth, qualities that gained for him the surname of Al-Amin, the True. His progress was slow, his footsteps were dogged, his foes persecuted him, his faithful wife Khadijah, and once he was stoned and left for dead by the roadside. At this conjuncture, help came from an unexpected quarter. The neighboring city of Medina was held by two tribes hostile to the people of Mecca, and they offered him and his converts asylum. At the dead of night and at the peril of his life, he fled from his birthplace, and that day is celebrated in the Mohammedan calendar as the beginning of the new era. This took place in the year 622 and is called the Hijra. His flight became known and pursuers followed him. He hid in a cave 3 days and 3 nights. Tradition loves to tell how a spider wove its web over the cave's mouth, and some doves, ever after sacred, laid their eggs before the cave, so that the pursuers judged therefore that none had entered the cave. Arrived at Medina, he organized his followers. From that time a complete change came over him. The man who had been as shy as a veiled virgin now became the apostle of war. With a small army of followers he overran Arabia, and in less than 7 years his gleaming sword had conquered every city of the land. Even Mecca fell before him, and he threw out the idols from the temple and consecrated it to the worship of Allah. Acknowledged was he now by the whole people as the prophet of God and as their king. His great gift is the Mohammedan Bible, the Quran, a book containing the message of the prophet which was collected by his follower, Zayd, from records written on palm leaves, white stones, leather, the shoulder blades of sheep and camels. Mohammedanism, the religion founded by Mohammed, or Mohammed, teaches, in opposition to the various idolatrous religions which it has succeeded in superseding, a strong theism, belief in God, essentially the same as taught by Judaism and Christianity, from which it was borrowed. There is no God but God is the principal tenet in Mohammedan dogmatics, and he has created the world and the immortal soul of man, whose life on earth he shall judge and reward or punish in a future state. But the further development of this idea, especially of the relationship between God and mankind, is narrow, fantastic, and arbitrary. Before the almighty power of Allah, the free will of man vanishes. Mohammedanism is fatalism. The Quran acknowledges and encourages polygamy, and it exists in all Mohammedan countries, with all its deteriorating and weakening consequences, spiritually and bodily. 10 years after Muhammad had fled from Mecca in the year 632, at the age of 62, he made a pilgrimage thither from Medina with 40,000 Muslims, and there on a mountain, like Moses of old, he uttered the last words to the people, exhorting them chiefly to protect the weak, the poor, the women, and to abstain from usury. He was sick for some days, the result of a poison administered to him by a woman. As he lay dying, with his head rested on the lap of Aisha, one of the numerous wives he had wedded after the death of Khadijah. She heard him murmuring as she looked into his pale face and slowly glazing eyes, "No, the companions above, in paradise." She took his hand in hers, praying. When she let it sink, it was cold and he was dead. He left 10 wives, of 14 which he had in all, but only one child, Fatima, the daughter of Khadijah, his first wife. And so long as Khadijah lived, Muhammad did not follow the practice usual among the Arabs of taking many wives. He was buried in the mosque at Medina, and at his tomb thousands of pilgrims gather every year. Islam is the Arabic name for the Mohammedan creed. Muslims is the name the professors of this creed give themselves. Saracens or Muslims, followers of Muhammad. Thank you for watching, and please don't forget to share, like, subscribe, or comment. And if you can, please consider donating towards the Rosies. Links to PayPal and Patreon are in the description. Thank you so very much.